I want to reinforce my rejoinder from last week. These several and sundry additions that I may have produced on these tapes, such as Kairouts, are certainly not to be considered of any possible pertinence. While the city is based upon binary appearances and upon psychopic perception, the real revolutionist has what amounts to, available to him, a second-order sight. Second-order sight. And since I made up the term, as you might, if not expect, hope for, I'm going to say something about what it might be. Second-order sight would be that which would allow someone to derive fresh info from outdated binary contraries. Let me see if I cannot give you what I would consider to be one or two or more splendid examples. How about the great, wide, and wonderful world of maxims in the city? Such as, you can't judge a book by its cover. A second-order sight can take an accepted truism, proverb, maxim, apothegm, and it could, theoretically, learn something from the maxim as given. I say theoretically because the nutritional value is already gone. But if the revolutionist was pushed, forced, threatened, wanted to, he or she could get up and wax poetically, preach sermons, concoct on the spot a whole new system based upon the obvious fact that you can't judge a book by its cover. There are even some people in the city that can almost do that. Second sight is that which reveals to the one with such second-order sight that you can turn that backwards. And it is just as true. Just as true. And a lot of you, that should strike you immediately because you fucking well can tell a book by its cover. You got to be an idiot. You got to really be city-born and city-bred to believe that you can't tell a book by its cover. What the hell is the sense in having a cover? Books have covers and they give some indication. And many times, according to the complexity of the dust jacket, they tell you in some detail what's in the book. Now, this is not, as I warned you about the Kairouts and etc., even now that we're into the heart of the serious stuff here on the tape, this is not simply funny. Because, as I said, some of you, maybe I picked too easy an example, and you might immediately think, well, hey, that is true. You can judge a book by its cover. But take any, not just proverbial sayings, but you can take that which is considered to be in the wonderful world of man an absolute statement of cultural, psychological, spiritual, intellectual, humane fact about what people are, what human life is. A statement. Second-order sight, you can take that statement and in the binary concept, turn it absolutely backwards. Nothing fancy, just turn the damn thing backwards. And you can derive new info out of it. Now, at least you take this too easily and say, well, if I had never been involved with this and I'd heard somebody try to explain this, what you just did, I could still have gone along with it. In fact, I got a knuckle that got no interest in such as this and only stays sober half the time, and I bet I could make him go, yeah, you can judge a book by its cover, but you could also say you can't judge a book by its cover, and then he'd talk about, well, hey, in fact, you remember your Aunt Esther, your Aunt Edna, somebody. You remember how, when you first saw her, what you thought about her? Yeah, and then you find out later once you got to know her that she was nothing like that? That's true, because you can't judge a book by its cover. First appearances are deceiving. That's true. First appearances aren't deceiving. First appearances, if we're going to pick up a new one here, first appearances are all conclusive. They are all revealing, and that's it. Of course, neither of these possibilities is a culmination of real fresh data. But second order sight, as I start out trying to sketch out for you, makes it possible for you to derive fresh info from what normally would have been outdated binary contraries. It's to take info that if such info was under the auspices of Food Giant or Safeway or A&P, and they were on the ball, this info would have been stamped out of date, or there would have already been on this so-called info an expiration date, and it is long gone. Here we're not dealing with the fact that you're buying eggs that are 2 weeks overdue. You're buying info. You're buying important information. You're accepting data having to do with your very life that we're talking about, dare I say it, thousands of years out of date. But no matter. Parts of life's body can even say that. Of course, all of you should be catching on by now that in the city, remember they play everybody's song. In the city, they play every possible song. Somewhere in life's body is something that thinks the opposite to anything that life has already thought. But be that as it may, somebody, even in the city, could say, well, a lot of this information, a lot of the religious information, obviously certain parts of scientific information, some psychological insights into human nature have been superseded by new insights. But they don't know that. They take the new insights as now being an update. But from a revolutionary view, if in the city it's accepted fact, if in the city it's somebody's song, it's outdated. And whether it be 5 minutes or 5,000 years, it's all the same thing. If you can see with what I'm calling a kind of second order sight, you can take anything and you can reverse it. Not that the reverse is correct, but that the reverse is as true as the original statement, as the original fact, as the original maxim, truism, proverb, and so forth. Neither one are correct, but both of them put together at least bring you to the order of second, or the level of second order trueness. You're still at least about one horseshoe shy of the post of correctness, but you now have enhanced truthfulness. You have truthfulness that's a little better than just everyday truthfulness in the city. You would have somebody, if this was not a NACB, you would have somebody that could see both sides of a question simultaneously. And if there were such people, they would, of course, amount to my erstwhile friends. They would be a certain kind of sane, irrational person, and they would be prime candidates for this. In the city, one side of a binary structure has to be correct. There has to be a piece of information, there has to be an observation that has the proper contrast. That is, that there is its alternative. There is its fallacious, it's incorrect, it's lacking alternative. Second order sight shows that the alternative, the other side of the coin, is not lacking. That if you've got the ability, while everyone else in the city is hollering in this one situation, heads is the correct, heads is the true, then you can turn it over and understand. Not convince other people, that's not the point, but you can turn it over and see that tails is also true. And it's not simply the other side of the question. It's not simply that the other possibility theoretically offers information and insight that was previously unavailable. There is a connection. The heads and the tail side of the coin are not separate. There is something in between. There is something that holds us together. There is something that holds together the fact that you can't judge a book by its cover, and the other fact that you can judge a book by its cover. There is something holding them together. That's where fresh data comes from. That big old E farm. Well, some kind of big old farm. Who knows what it is? The real revolutionists would be continually in the business of expanding arithmetic into algebra and expanding geometry into trig. he would be continually expanding ordinary knowledge into what should more correctly be referred to in our case as a kind of 4D topology. Let me go off at a slight right angle if you will try and follow, similar to the maxims. In the city, ordinary consciousness can attempt to take what seems to be a reasonable, a logically, historically well-founded base to expand what seems to be ordinary knowledge. And an example would be that in the city, people could attribute some human act, something that another person has done, they could attribute it to the person's willpower. My God, since I've seen you last, you look like you've lost 40 pounds. You look so much better, and I bet you feel better. How did you do it? The assumption is it took an act of willpower. How did you quit smoking? How did you quit drinking? An act of willpower. All right. Now, if we start out at a very superficial level, of course, back in the city, that's not superficial, but now you and I are talking. Second order sight would go beyond what everybody else calls willpower, and it would go off, let's just call it deeper to start with, and would look, to use ordinary terminology, into an area that would most likely lend itself to be called motivation. The second order sight would be sort of like this. Now don't stop long here because this is very crude. I'm fixing to jump somewhere else that's extremely non-crude and probably inexplicable. The real revolutionist, if he was dealing on this small level, wherein in this example that other people are talking about a matter of willpower, he would talk about a matter of motivation. That is, in the city, ordinary people, a person does not, in some isolated way, get up one morning, get up one night, lay down one night, lay down one morning, go sideways in one afternoon, and through an act of willpower say, hey, I'm going to lose 40 pounds. Hey, I'm going to quit smoking. Nay, nay. Compared to that, there was motivation, such as the doctor said, if you don't lose weight, you're probably going to die in about 5 years. Such as his lungs and blood in the sink. And perhaps the family doctor again says, if you don't quit smoking, you're probably going to die in 2 hours. Through an act of willpower, I lost weight. The quick part, once people in the city, once ordinary consciousness even reaches the point in individual cases, or what might appear to be across the board, that they apparently now are investigating motives, that they've gone beyond willpower to motives, then revolutionary consciousness has got to go even deeper. Revolutionary consciousness has got to be more angled still. That if the apparent questions of motivation have now become the foundation of investigation into human activity, then it's no longer sufficient. It would operate somewhat like this, to use cityfied examples. It would appear in the city that what we're talking, or what I'm talking about now, would be kind of psychological explanations, and you would have, that is, talking about someone exercising willpower, or then saying what motivates a man to want to beat up on women, what motivates a certain woman to always want to be attracted to men who seem to want to play Stars and Stripes Forever on her jaw. They would apparently be talking about motivations. But when they're talking about psychological motivation, psychological explanations of all kind, what this amounts to is that it only goes so far as to apparently show that an individual was responsible. In the city, it is ultimately in a frustrating and unaccountable manner. That is psychology. and religion, but nowadays psychology, reaches the point that ultimately it cannot explain in a satisfactory manner why the individual does this. But still only surface before you take it that far, and as far as psychologists and city people are concerned, run the bastard in the ground. Up until that point, psychological explanations only go so far as to show that an individual was responsible. Revolutionary info, the kind of data that I keep trying to convey, exposes life itself as the ultimate culprit. It's life that's the real cause. And this fits no psychological explanation. It fits no scientific schematic. It fits into no philosophical framework, unless we were talking about some kind of theoretical, anthropomorphical idea, which is simply a theory, which is simply warmed over a Grecian dream. City folks cannot handle it. But that would be the difference. Wherein everything else, I say psychological explanations now, I'm dealing still with, in sophisticated modern cities, contemporary times, individual consciousness, individual sight, even if people do not use terms to themselves or others like, I'm having a psychological view of something. They're taking it as being an intellectual, sophisticated, reasonable, hoped for exposition on why people operate as they do. But on a psychological basis, which we have now in most cities as opposed to your forefathers' religious explanations, we have the psychological explanation that whatever happened is an individual in the situation. If we're talking about a man and a woman, and he beats her up, and the woman keeps getting men that beat her up, you got to turn the situation, as it always does in human consciousness, with a one big eye, on one partner or the other. So it doesn't matter, but if you're talking about the man, it still comes down to apparently showing that an individual, if we're talking about the man, then him, is individually responsible. Or if we were looking at it from a concern about the woman, then we got to say that she, from a psychological explanation, with a psychological explanation, that she is individually responsible. As I point out also, sort of in passing, ultimately that breaks down. Ultimately it is unsatisfying because it's unaccountable. How can you say why to somebody? Why does this woman? We've observed that every time she finds a man that beats her up and they put the guy in jail, the first thing she does is rush down to jail, not to bail him out, but ask him if he's got any friends like him. And so there's no satisfactory explanation. Why does somebody go to all this effort to get beat up? And so they can't deal with that, but that's still sort of en passant. It is back to an individual being responsible. Whereas this goes off at a very surprising and oftentimes untrackable angle. And what it is ultimately pointing towards is the ultimate culprit. It's not the people involved. It's not the people's parents. And I hate to tell you, it's not even society. It's life itself. That's the information. That is the information that is so fresh that it doesn't really fit into old ears. It is a key that is so fresh that life is yet, on any large scale, to make any locks that it might open. It's like having cures for ills that are not yet known. It's like having keys for locks that no one's really aware that, hey, we need to get in there. Nobody wants to get in there except you people. And some of you, me and the kid, have our doubts about, but at least we got you off the street and our hubcaps are safe. Once or twice a week. Those attempting to do this, recruits, should not even be speaking in ordinary terms of thought. You should not even be thinking in ordinary terms of speech. You should not be thinking in any way that you could talk about. You should not be talking about if you were going to ever talk seriously. If there was such a thing, if that is not the ultimate oxymoron. You should not ever talk about anything that you could think about seriously. Because if you do, you're using outdated info. You're using outdated binary contraries. You're using as a thought contrast that which is of no value, to say the least, which is not to say much. From a revolutionary viewpoint, it's worse than that because it makes you think you're going somewhere. It makes you think you're actually thinking, and you're not. You're having a cityfied mental turnaround. You're not thinking. You should be forcing the yellow circuits, forcing them to work within a scheme that would fit 4D, at least my term of 4D topography. It's not just the sketching out of the being of man or the being of life, and it's not really just the attempted sketching out on a 2 or 3D surface that which might be, or on a 2D surface that which might be 3D extant, which of course they can do that with. Rand and McNally can do that. Even Burns and Allen could do that, but they went out of business. It is being able to take 3D reality and to turn it into a 4D map. That would be 4D topography. That is what you should be forcing the yellow circuit into doing. And I go back again, at least you thought it was too obvious or just a simple explanation. You are surrounded in life by cliches, such as you can't judge a book by its cover. You're surrounded. If it's been said twice, it's a cliche from a revolutionary viewpoint. And just because you do not talk in cliches, I think that Kyrut one time either said, or I think he's about to say some week, that you should never deal in cliches even if the shoe fits and your life depends on it. You are dealing in cliches. You are dealing in cliches continually. You think in cliches. I know I did not hit enough, or I did not hit a lot of people right in the bullseye last time we were here when I was giving you the example, trying to get you to see, and through the little example I made of you going past a business, a sign indicating something going on in a place of which you had no personal experience. The Doodah warehouse, and you got no idea what goes on in a Doodah warehouse. But the molecular operation of your own brain fills in the blanks, not only of whatever a Doodah operation would be, but as I point out, a warehouse. There are probably people sitting here now seeing this tape that literally have never been in an actual warehouse. And you never thought about it because you have seen enough movies, TV shows, read enough, seen enough pictures that there's no doubt what a warehouse is. And of course, from a city view, this kind of knowledge does not put you at any great disadvantage. This operational knowledge will get you by as well as any, but it's as though you are continually being aware of the picture of reality, the sketches, and they're like these little books that you used to have as a child, fill in the dots. They're just little pieces, and you can glance at it and say, wait a minute, that's a saddle. They already drew that in, and there's all these little dots, and you know you got to fill it in, but it could be a saddle on a horse, a camel, a pig, a big old fat person, you know, who knows what. And so your mind fills in. And people do not ordinarily take this into consideration, but you are continually filling in information. Now, I repeat, in the city, this is fine. And for you people, when it's in matters that have no great consequence, well, who cares? It is a shortcut. It is a way in which you can operate without having to have experienced every little thing in this kind of complex life that city people are faced with. The importance is to finally realize that you know things in the yellow circuit, the ordinary yellow circuit. You know things that you don't know. You fill in reality with that you have never experienced. Not that it's wrong, I tell you one more time. You could not even live in the city at the rate at which men are forced to live. Did you not do that? But in between that which operates and that which I am pointing out, that you've never thought about and has never been pointed out, in between those two is something necessary to see, something useful to use. The useful place is that you have a gap wherein you might be able to derive new information. But you will never do it so long as you allow the yellow circuit, your own intellect, your own daydreams, to immediately, with no analyzation, with no awareness, to continue to always fill in the dots. Now we're getting into a real good right angle area that's not much more than last week am I going to say. Because I can potentially spoil it. I can potentially make some of you think, I see it. There is a place in there of you becoming aware of the fact that your own daydreams, your own intellectual processes, your own yellow circuit activities are continually, just almost second by second, filling in the blanks with info that you have not gained through experience, which, for the fourth time, is quite acceptable, is operational, and is necessary under certain cosmopolitan conditions. But you need to be aware of it, and there is a gaping hole there that you can jump off to a place that at least might make a black hole look gray. Because there's a place there that you can begin to see things that you would have never seen. Because you normally fill it in, a doodah warehouse. And you keep going because just like that you can fill in. And it made some sense. It made enough sense that you didn't stop and get immobile. That life did not come to a standstill while you went, what in God's name is a doodah warehouse? Well, wait a minute. Who am I fooling? I don't even know what a warehouse is. I know the words and I know I've seen them in movies, but I do not know personally what a warehouse is. What am I going to do? Am I going to stop and go in now and ask them, can I come in and see a warehouse and then question the people and make notes? Am I just going on and forget it? I can't. There was a piece of reality to me, and suddenly I realized that wasn't actual reality. I was just filling in the dots. That is the nature of the ordinary yellow circuit activities. You should not, if you were being a real revolutionary recruit, you should not allow yourself to think in ordinary terms of thought. You cannot let even your speech run through the ordinary, based upon the ordinary terms of thought. And it's not simply a matter of stopping thought. That's been tried over and over and over, and enough of you read about that before you met me. And it's not enough for real revolutionists to sit around and hope that some mystical day that something will come upon him and stop all of his mechanical, preordained, unnourishing perceptions, and that he'll suddenly be freed and he'll look around and see all these miraculous things. You got the opportunity. The few people do it were born, not to the manner born, but to insanity born, to the bushes born, I should say. To the bush born. That those people should be making the active attempt to find this usable gap between the mind continually filling in the blanks and something else. And it's not a something else. It's not the something else. It's not a or the something else. I'm going to tell you. It's not the opposite of what your mind would have filled in. But that's a place to start. That's why I brought it up. Because the opposite of what your mind filled in is just as pregnant, it is just as potentially nourishing, and it is just as true as that which your mind. And of course, we're talking about your mind. We're talking about a serious, sharp as a tack mind. What it would have filled in, the opposite is just as true, just as nourishing, just as useful. in the city, you've got people living what amounts to is like in a fog up to the chin, like it's as though in the city everyone's living in a fog up to your chin, and all of the heads believe they're in charge. All the heads, they pretend they're in charge, and yet right below the haze, you've got pockets being picked, you've got shins being kicked, you've got parts being fondled, and you've got deciding blows being dealt. And yet it's though from here up, it's a whole other pretend world. Of course, that's more truth than fancy, is it not? That's more reality than allegory. It's more certain than cartoonish. How much goes on? How much goes on of the fuel to fill in the dots in the areas in which you have no experience? That would seem to be, for the last 5 minutes, I keep referring to that which seems to be the yellow circuit in operation. Your own intellectual processes, your own daydreams, continually filling in the blanks and making sense of that, which from one viewpoint makes no sense to you. Or filling in the blanks so that something which is outside your experience now becomes, apparently, just instantaneously, operational, understandable. And it would all seem that this is taking place from the chin up. And that in the city, it's all these heads. And everyone, each and every head pretends it's in charge. And yet below the haze, I suggest to you, not just nefarious, but notorious, cogent, telling deeds are taking place that almost seem removed from these floating heads. Well, I am pointing out that from a certain view, it would be from a second-order sight, that anything is true, forwards and backwards. Maxims, proverbs, common sense, oh, especially common sense. That it's just as true backwards as it is forwards, leads us to this other exciting area, wherein I will point out to you verbally that from a second-order sight, which is another way of saying if you know the secret, but from second-order sight, all words are basically the same. All words basically mean the same thing. Don't they? Or if that's too strange, let me put it another way. All real, all new info words are in code. If it's real, now of course this is only to the few people outside the city. This has no pertinence whatsoever in the city. But for the few people, if we're talking about any kind of new info, it's in code. It's in code whether you want it to be in code or not. If you can listen fast enough, the person attempting, if we had a revolutionist attempting to convey some new info that was not known in the city, then what he or she conveyed would be in code whether they intended it to be or not. It would be in code whether they knew it or not. Now, this is not exactly true, as always, but it's true enough for me to say it. If it's new info, it's in code. That's just a fact. I'm sorry. Of course, I'm not sorry. It's just damn figure of the kid. Figure of Sony Henry. Figure of speech. I knew what I meant. It is only ordinary, outdated info that seems, as it should, to be obvious and self-evident. If that were not true, the city would fall apart. In the city, ordinary consciousness, same thing. But in the city, you have got to have info that is obvious on its face. It has got to be self-evident, even if it's self-evidently erroneous. Well, of course, I say self-evident. You know, maybe it'll take you 2 or 3 seconds, or 2 or 3 minutes, or 2 or 3 hours. It makes no difference. But the city folks, the people, can with a certain felicity ascertain that this is real information, be it true or false. But the kind of information that you need to do this, new information, is always in code. It's in code whether you want it to be or not. It's in code whether you know it is or not. It's in code whether you hear it to be in code or not. None of that makes any difference. It's in code. It's like a real spoiled 4-dimensional brat. It's in code whether you like it, whether you don't like it, whether you recognize it as such or not, whether you recognize it as not in code. Whether to you it's obviously, hey, this is one case, this is an exception because this is direct and self-evident, this is not coded. You're wrong. If it's not coded, it's not new info. It's ordinary. It's outdated. It's just binary contraries. It's seeing shadows of something through contrast. Next section. Real power is silent. Time turns every deranged, disreputable conquistador into a heroic warrior. The revolutionist must take all of his faults, shortcomings, complaints, and turn them into willful weapons, into controlled combustions, into useful allies. If he does not, then he will never have silent power over himself, and he will never turn what seems to be his villains, his deranged me's, his shortfalled quirks, his bad habits. They will never be rehabilitated. I'm using that in a particular sense now. I'm not talking about rehabilitation in the city. This is more a kind of, there's a legalese use of this term. You take that which seems to have been corrupted it's like being able to become a virgin all over. In the city, they do not believe in real rehabilitation. They call it reform. They do not believe in real change, even though they talk about it. We've been through this now. And it's all based on the contrast that I need to change. I need to reform. But that's on the basis that there is something wrong with me, and it can be at least slightly altered. I can make these, all right, my bad temper. I'll just bet you that if I tried real hard and wrote myself notes that I could quit beating my woman, I could get down to once a week, maybe just on the weekend. I'd feel better about it. Well, of course, I know she'd feel better. She said she would. But I'd be proud of that if I could do that. Well, sure, I guess I am perhaps 50 pounds overweight, but I bet you I could lose. I bet easy. I bet in the next month or so I could lose a couple of pounds. It's all on the basis that there is something wrong and I can reform it. I can take the apparent ill-mannered, uncouth, feral villain from my past, and I will slowly reform it, gradually reform it. And as I started out with the post-colon, which is no comment upon its physical position in the great scheme of physiological explanations, but post-colon, when I pointed out that time turns every deranged, despicable conquistador into a heroic warrior. Just given enough time, in the right circumstances, and Attila, if you go over to where his homeland, he's a national hero. They have National Attila Day. There is a way in which, don't get bogged down yet because I hadn't even gotten to the good part, but that you have got to be able to deal with what seems to be the villains in you, what seems to be the spiritual, if you were still that old and that deranged yourself and not out of touch, what seems to be your psychological, nefarious villains, all these bad aspects of you, your weaknesses. There's a way in which you have got to turn them into useful allies. Now, the reason I brought up the post-colon comment of pointing out that time turns every villain into a hero is that to do this, for I to make every me into an acceptable and useful ally, to be able to do this in one lifetime, you have got to learn to push time around. Or else we'd be back to using my description, taking it on the ordinary city level. And that is, if for some reason you warranted this, as it turns out in life's body, that you do become a small footnote in a history book somewhere, then for you to become rehabilitated, for you to cease being the guy with real bad manners, all the little shortcomings that you've got, although you have written a fairly well-known metaphysical book and you had some followers, you got to die and let ordinary time put a certain amount of distance between you and others for you to become an acceptable hero. So what I'm pointing out, someone attempting to do the unnatural, somebody attempting to go off into a right-angled time warp from the city, I assume that you do understand that there is the distinct possibility that if you wait until you die, that some hope may be gone. Some possibility of extensive change may be lost in that process. So what we're talking about is doing something extraordinary in one lifetime, and you cannot wait through the ordinary run of 60 or 70 years for your villains to become heroes. So you have got to do something in what seems to be 65 city years. And to do this, you've got to push time around. To do this, you've got to be able to do such things. Say, what would be a good word? You've got to be able to do such things as, it's on the tip of my tongue, Jesus. The impossible, that was it. That's it, Jesus. The kid chuckled and said that we're not talking about walking on the water and flying through the air. Very perceptive, very perceptive. No, we're talking about the impossible. We're talking about having silent power. We're talking about an understanding out in the bush that the only question is, if this needs to be done, am I going to do it? That's the only question. It's not the question, am I going to do this tomorrow? It's not the question, am I going to do this so that somebody will see me? Am I going to do this and then explain it? Am I going to do this and then tell somebody about it? Am I going to do this until I decide I can't do it? Am I going to do this until I get real tired? Am I going to do this until I get real discouraged? Am I going to try to do this until I find out that, Jesus, it can't be done? Am I going to do this until somebody says, wow, you deserve 2 or 3 little gold stars up next to your name for even trying that. Nobody can do that. And so on, and so on, and so forth. The only way you can do the impossible, or one of the ways I'm describing, is you've got to be able to push time around. The kids, I guess you could hear him, I don't know what it picks up, but ever since he took that sailing course, he keeps, I didn't say time around, I said time around. He thinks he's a clever little sailor, but I think he's a little dingy. Of all the ways, or several ways I could explain doing something that seems to be impossible, is that you have got to escape the ordinary marina of time. See, I can do that too, that kind of thing. One of the ways to describe the impossible in the city is this. Not simply that something is physically or psychologically or intellectually impossible. One way of translating what they mean in the city by impossible is this could be done, or this can be done, but we don't have the time to do it. Either I don't have the time to do it, humanity has not had the time to do it, the evolution of the race of man has yet to have time to do it. That's impossible, right? If you cannot learn how to push time around, you can't do the impossible. I'm going to spend a few more minutes still on pushing time around because, well, just because. If there was anything worthwhile for me to say on a more personal level through what people here have experienced, if there was any one area that almost makes me want to abandon people individually, collectively, and or engage in fisticuffs with any of the would-be recruits, it's people who, by all appearances and by all feel, all smell, are very likely to the bush born, or at least to the outskirts of town born, and for them to be around a certain length of time, and then began to even put forth verbally, and sometimes otherwise, the serious, sincere individual questions, inquiries, and expressing concerns over their lack of progress, and are over the pressing problems, difficulties in their life that keeps them from making the necessary progress. It's as though they think I've been talking about everybody should have a rocket bike, whatever that would be. And it's as though after some length of time, they come see me and they're apparently pushing this thing that I'll assume is a rocket bike. And either literally, physically, or otherwise, it's as though they sort of push this invisible thing, and then they want to ask me about how can I get going? Why can't I get going? Why am I stuck here? Why won't the damn thing run like it sounded like it would when you enticed me to get it? All this kind of stuff. And what it amounts to is I want to turn to them. Now, we're just talking casually. If we operated on the 3D level, that I would want to turn to them and say, have you got a rocket bike? As far as you're concerned, and people more or less go, well, yeah, I believe I do. And I say, and you got your, as far as you can tell, you got your rocket bike license, yeah, and you got on the correct shoes and the leather pants or whatever to ride it, and they go, yeah. And yet your inquiry seems to be about, why aren't you over in some other county, over in some other city, in another state? Yeah. And if we were just 3D characters, you and I, then what I want to do is either this or hands around the throat like, you dumb motherfucker, why don't you get on the son of a bitch and ride it then? But no, people, they're propped up here leaning like they're shining it and kicking the tires, and all the while discussing, why am I not over here? Why am I not somewhere else? Why am I not away from my problems after all the time and energy I've spent listening to you? And I say, what did you think you're leaning on? Well, yeah, that is my rocket bike. What is it you think that you could ride? Well, it's this. What is it you're almost convinced that you have ridden once or twice? Well, this. Why don't you ride the son of a bitch? Well, a tacit aspect of what I've just made up and described is the time problem with them. It takes time to learn how to ride a rocket bike. It takes time to even become accustomed to perhaps having one. It takes time to become acclimated to the possibility of doing something. And of course, it obviously takes time, even if I do get on it and ride. It takes time to go from here to God knows where. Well, it takes time to become acclimated to the possibility of doing something. And of course, it obviously takes time, even if I do get on it and ride. It takes time to go from here to God knows where. Well, what if that were true? Then you certainly are displaying all the signs of an astounding intellect, because if it does take time to go somewhere, then you obviously got the right idea of standing here and talking about it. Right off the bat, I'm impressed. Pushing around time is being able to grab, as unmystical as it sounds, is being able to grab what needs to be done And far too many of you people leaning on your imaginary handlebars, you already know what needs to be done, and don't worry about what kind of right mystical angles and internal strange experiences may lay ahead, may even lie ahead. But right now, you know things that you should do. We're not going into them, because if I go into them, they don't even count. They're not moral, they're not ethical, they're not religious, they're not even, all of them, fattening. But you know, anybody that's been here for a long enough time to know that you are to the bush born, there are things, oh, all right, to the least of you, right now there is a thing that you know needs to be done. We're not going into it. But there seems to be always a matter of time. But if you knew how to push around time, you would know what it is to deal with so-called problems in the only way that is revolutionarily acceptable, and that is you simply grab it and you do it. And you, in fact, do it silently. You just do it, that's all. And anytime I come around to verbalizing this area, I know full well that based on the wiring schematics of life and the humans, that there are those of you sitting here that have been around this for months and years, it would seem in certain ways to be of equal potential, to have equal hunger, equal ability, and someone sitting here will hear this as being, ooh, and the feeling is, every time I hear such as that, it just strikes me as, hey, that's it. There is no other secret. That's it. You just do it. And then the person right next to you on that same night goes, I wonder what the allegorical significance of that is. I mean, that's a code. I wonder what he's really talking about. You know, he's obviously not just talking about just doing something. And then all you got to wait until your moon goes from your Sagittarius into your Thunderbird, and next time you think, hey, what kind of coded flim-flam is that? And the person next to you, that particular time, hears it as being an absolute direct arrow to the heart. You could look at time as being at one level, and all of you will go through variations of this, those of you that press on. You can look at it as time being one of the prime villains, standing between you being superhero, Mr. Ultra cartoon Saturday man or woman, and like at a new level in front of a new cave, in front of a new moat, going to a new castle, to a new cache of rewards, that time becomes it. There's some of you now that think, hey, time's running out. There's some of you now that feel as though you do not have enough time in life. There's some of you that think that the reason you don't have enough time to do more right now is because of me. I keep coming up with things of, hey, go do this, go do that. And the whole group, I give you something to do. And Jesus, it ends up you don't even have enough time to look after your own salvation. Look after your own personal affairs, that you're too busy doing all this other stuff. Kid just said he was just sick over it too. What a joker, huh? What a card. If he wasn't my sister's uncle, well, never mind. There is a way in which you can see time. Now we're talking about your present conception of time. We're not talking about as the additional dimension. We're not talking about as a seamless backdrop It would be holding together the rest of your present perceptions of life and yourself. But just what seems to be the horizontal, the city perception of time, you can see that as being an arch enemy. Not just weakness, not bad habits, not stupidity, not lack of motivation, not lack of willpower, but time. Because were it not for time, what would be the gap between you right now and you're saying, I should do so-and-so? What stands between you and that? You're a big boy and girl now. You don't believe that they're demons. In fact, I've made you a little bigger boy and girl than you were even in the city. You no longer believe that it's psychological, unconscious quirks and traumas, right? Right. It's time. That I can do this given enough time. I will be able to do this when the time is ripe. And don't try and sing me those songs by the Birds and quote Ecclesiastes about everything has its time. Everything does have its time. But if you wait for something extraordinary, if you're going to depend on horizontal time to bring it to you, the very best that will happen, the very quickest that will happen in anybody's life is they're throwing in the first shovel of dirt on your face. And right then it will rush up. It will rush up right then and jump out of the limo and look at its watch and go, damn. And it'll have a story, of course, if you could hear it, that it would have been there. But that's going to be the quickest that anything will come in horizontal time. It will never happen. As potentially unprofitable as this can be to a large number of you when I talk like this, let me jump off on one other small sidestep before I leave this. You do understand, don't you? I mean, saying do things just directly and not fool with time. We're not talking about anything that's pertinent. We're not talking about anything that's relevant. That doesn't count. It's got to be irrelevant. That's the only thing that you can do outside time. None of us can do actual miracles. We're talking about 4D miracles. Nobody can do the impossible. Whatever is impossible in this city is impossible. Whatever is impossible in that state is impossible. In that state, in that city. If the people cannot do this, then the people cannot do this. It would seem to be a matter of things being untimely. But that is only holds true, that only has validity if it is something that is pertinent. If you're going to do the impossible, you've got to, once you know how to do this, you've got to pick that. It's there. It's not that you have to go out and look through it like trying to find just the right pair of shoes. But it has to be the irrelevant. It has to be something that from an ordinary view, from a timely view, something that is irrelevant. That is the only way to get what appears and what feels to be new energy. That's the only way to derive any new info. It has to be brought in from the pool of the irrelevant. Okay. What does that mean now if you're going to make it simpler? You don't start off with something that's obvious. You don't start off with your own villains, with your own apparent shortcomings saying, hey, we need to do so-and-so. They've been telling you that all your damn life. And did you do anything? No. Did you try anything? Oh, yeah, I tried. And what success? I'll hold my breath while you tell me. And what success did you have? And, of course, if you were not truthful but correct, you would say in one word, it's got to be the irrelevant. Not grossly irrelevant. You can't even comprehend that. It's not the infinite irrelevant, locally irrelevant, slightly irrelevant, partially irrelevant, maybe irrelevant. I'm not even sure whether it's relevant. All of that will qualify. If you find out how to do that, then you find out what seems to be the press, the limitation of times, does not seem to apply to that. It's as though time doesn't care. It's as though time finds out, here's you say, if you were saying it, well, I believe I'm going to start doing so-and-so. No, I don't believe I'm going to. I just started. And it's as though time goes, what? And it looks to see, are you actually going to do this? And every day you do it over and over and over if it's a daily habit. And you do it. And so time goes, Jesus, you know, are you nuts? Are you crazy? Do you want me to throw you out of the city? And this is not by any means limited to some physical activity you take up. Well, not in the observable physical activity. It's as though you decide to, I'll put it real crudely, think in a different way, to think about something specifically in a different way. And it's something that you as a city-fied person, the way in which you were wired up, you have no inherent interest in changing your thought patterns in this particular manner. You are taking up a useless hobby. It's as though it is a 90-pound person fasting. It's as though it is a person with an abdominal section that looks like a rough country road, working up from 1,000 to 2,000 sit-ups a day. Transfer that to something that would seem to be intellectual exercise. And it's though time goes, what? But we got a different story if we got something that is naturally, apparently natural, abhorrent to you, distasteful, some villainous aspect of you. We got a different matter. If we've got you and you're 20 pounds overweight just from overeating, and you're carrying around a half of a spare tire, and you decide, you decide through willpower, right? I don't know, through motivation. Who knows? I think I'm going to start doing set-ups. That's what I should do. I'm going to get me a book on set-ups, first thing I get. As soon as I get time, I'm going to stop down the street and I'm going to get me a book. As soon as I get time, that guy I work with, he goes to the gym. I say, when will I see him? Well, next time I see him, I'll ask him his suggestion as to what kind of sit-up. And it's as though if time was taking in notice of you under these conditions, it takes about that long. And time knows all is well with your soul. It knows that you may have been straying out from the city here and there, but you are city-born, city-bred, and you're going to buy the farm in the city. Time has no worry. If you start doing that which seems to be almost useless, it's when you can find out that there's a way in which you can push time around. And I assume that many of you suspect that the point of this is not to spend the rest of your life doing things that are irrelevant. Of course, you could suspect that and you'd be wrong, but you can suspect it if you want to. It just shows that you're still logical. It just shows that you're still partially sane, and we've got a long way to go, and what is running out? I believe it's time to ask you again, what is the difference between actually achieving a state, being in possession of certain abilities? What's the difference in that and forcing people to believe that you've achieved such a state or that you have such abilities? What is the difference? The kid wants me to remind you that I'm aware of the fact that I've asked this before, so that none of you thought, hey, is his face trying to brighten up like here's a brand new bombshell and we've already heard this? What is the difference between having achieved some new state or having now in your possession some certain ability that you did not previously have, maybe an unusual ability, at least for you? It's not natural. What's the difference in that, either one of those, and forcing others to believe that you have achieved such a state or that you possess such abilities? I guess this in the city would qualify as being an egregious question, if not possibility, that the difference is beyond being blatant. Probably verge upon the monumentally irrelevant. Of course, in the city, now I think about it, in the city, you know what they would think if they heard me say that? It just struck me. I'm glad you mentioned that. In the city, if I made that comment, or that kind of rhetorical question about what's the difference in actually having achieved some new state or having some new ability and forcing people to believe you have, you know what they would think in the city? It just struck me, old dumb me. They would think that I meant that you're forcing other people to believe that you got some ability that you don't have. That's what they'd think in the city. I'll be. I hadn't looked at it that way. They sure would. I guess if I was going to say it in the city, I should rephrase that, shouldn't I? Well, I don't have time to think about it. That got fairly relevant, I guess, disjointed from what I was saying, but I was about to even go further. Something was absolutely irrelevant. For some reason, just about making potential foes if you give them the impression that they were about done for. Yeah, I'm right. There is no possible connection between any of that. Well, how about this? As much as I've seemed to, from a certain view, I guess, laughed at human problems and scoffed at them, it's not really fair and it's not really a correct observation, and none of the statements are conclusive. Because I should say this, that there are the routine, common, everyday problems to those who believe such. Of course, back in the city, I guess those people I think about would think that some of that would go on the not I, into the not I part of the equation. Since there's absolutely no connection between any of this, and some people's eyes are getting so big that what if there was some way to what seems to be, and fill in, if you don't like any of my terms, let me sitting here all night, your problems, your shortcomings, your difficulties, your inherited weaknesses, your psychologically acquired quirks, your hidden faults, your psychological St. Andreas faults, your danger zones, your semi-secret perversions, all the things that you hide in the closet. What if all of those do exist? The one time they were called demons and bad spirits, and we just got new names for them. Then call them psychological quirks. And now even some people might say, well, some of it's even genetic, chemical flaws in your brain, in your nervous system. All right, all that. And what if, we just change the name, what if you are full, you and everybody else are full of little demons? I'm not sure what they look like, but they used to. In real old books, there used to be these little horny-toed creatures and with tails and little daggers on their tails, little horns. It's not a bad picture when you think about it. How about jealousy when it gets you? You almost choke. Or you get so damn mad that somebody could pull in front of you when you're in a goddamn hurry trying to get out and they saw the yield sign. You almost can't swallow. You can't picture this little bitty demon inside there at your windpipe going, sure you can. All right, so what if they do exist, and some guys? What if? That all my laughing and all that, never mind, they're in there and I feel them. And I'd sure like to fly away and do some kind of mystical thing and see the weird things that you evidently see. But Jesus, you don't know these mundane, routine problems I got to put up with. All right, the little demons, what if they're true? But you've been trying to fight them. Everybody says they're trying to fight them. Humanity is wired up to try and fight them. It is a part of the triaxial dance. It is a part of the growth process of life through man. But what if instead of you going through this, obviously, or it should be, obviously useless battle, you begin to make them think that they're suffering from some terminal illness, that you treated them as though they were impotent. You treated them as though time had run out. You treated them as though you had miraculous powers that, as far as you and I know, you might not have. But what if you force them to believe it? See, that's what I started. I kind of came to my senses there in the midst of all this, that in the city, if I told people that, they would think that I was talking about trying to act like you had abilities and to force other people out here to believe it, which you can't do. It'll catch up with you. It's impossible. What's the purpose? People in the city would say all kinds of crap like that. Of course, people in the city, well, what if there's another possibility? No, we're not talking about the people, making people believe that you've got abilities that you don't have. Of course, that isn't the way I started out putting it, was it? I asked, what's the difference in actually having them, having the abilities, and forcing other people to believe you have? What's the difference in having the world's newest, largest, secret, omnidirectional Poobah cannon over here down in a gully, and your adversaries, the other armies over there, and they've heard about such a thing, or they get reports about it? What's the difference? And you actually having one down in here, if you can make them believe you got one down there. Well, I need about 15 minutes at the end. Before I stop, a few other things. Over the last few weeks, I continually jump back, drop back, threaten to punt, take an end run, having to do with a kind of absolute self-protection, a kind of controlled aggression, as I have termed it. We'll take another swipe. I'm not going to stay much longer than I have before, but let me remind you that in the city, using the terms such as aggression, if I was only talking about ordinary aggression, I remind you again, I have not changed the game in the middle. Ordinary aggression is a city ill for which there is no treatment. It is part of that haze. It is a malady for which there is no treatment. You cannot live in the bush while still suffering from city-bred aggression. So all of you should know that is not what I've been talking about. What I'm talking about is me saying controlled aggression, and I even once told you I shouldn't say aggression, but I decided not to make up a new term at the time. But it is far removed from ordinary hostility, anger of any kind. And it would be like a molecular, an internal, individual molecular production of an enhanced emotional immune system is what it is. But it has to be active. It is not, let me repeat, it is not some 2, even 3-dimensional version of imagined stoicism. It is active, but it is a kind of enhanced immune system. And that is a part of what I meant by aggression. That's not all of it. That's not the only reason I use the term. But it is active. You cannot protect yourself in the bush by hiding. You cannot protect yourself by curling up like a hedgehog. You cannot protect yourself by finding a trench or a foxhole. There are none. There is no help coming. The only way that you can defend yourself, revolutionarily speaking, is through a kind of willful offense. Now, God knows now what I'm talking about between you and other people or something else. Who knows? I would stop and try and explain this or figure it out myself, but as time is running where? Short. And so I don't know. You're going to have to, maybe I'll come back to it some other time. But I can tell you this, as long as you're sick, as long as you are emotionally hurt, as long as you are emotionally ill at all, as long as someone is throwing water on your combustion, as long as somebody is rattling the cage on your lab, as long as you're hurt at all, you're not in the bush. And you're not doing anything. Period. I won't say you're getting it worse, but you're not doing anything. No matter what else you seem to be doing, no matter what book you might be reading, no matter what book you may be writing, no matter if you're sitting here listening to me, which we might assume for a laughing moment might be the epitome in your life of the conveyance of new info, if you are sitting there suffering the outrageous or the slings and arrows of routine misfortune, fuck outrageous, just everyday misfortune, then nothing else is going on. Nothing else. Nothing is getting through, no new data, no new info. You are molecularly the same creature that you were born in the city. Anything else is a cartoon. Your imagination, your mechanical daydreaming. Because there is a kind of willful hold that you must take on protecting yourself, and I'm saying emotionally. That is not the best term, but I'm going to leave it at that tonight. What seems to be that which affects your feeling has got to be reproduced on another molecular level, wherein the whole immune system to the slings and arrows of mundane misfortune, to where you are immune. You don't fake it. You don't simply look deadpan, and you don't go away and hold your breath and suck your thumb and say, well, I don't care anyway, I don't care anyway, I don't care anyway. Let's don't waste our what? Time. It takes a kind of revolutionary, unnatural strength. And it's not something that you show off. It's not something people necessarily know. But it is at the heart of what many, many of you periodically and or consistently believe are some of the pressing problems of your life. That is, I cannot deal with my relationships with blank. my mother, my father, my sister, my brother, my current lover, my ex-wife, my ex-husband. You're talking about feeling. Now you may want to discuss it. God knows you may want to discuss it. Which you do know, I mean, talk about it. Put words on this and say, "Ooh, have you got a moment? Have you got an hour? Have you got a year? Wait till I tell you how my ex-wife treated me. Wait till I tell you how my mother treated me and still does. Wait till I tell you what she said to me last night when she called." You cannot talk your way out of any of this. You should know that. If you believe otherwise, you should be in therapy or in a confessional booth. There's a way in which you can protect yourself. There's a way in which you have got to take a kind of willful control over your revolutionary sense of I. The mundane flow of misfortune, the ordinary level of the shit creek, cannot be part of your everyday life. It's there, and the others are still playing in it. It may still seem to be affecting in a like manner those with whom you were previously involved, but you have got to extract yourself from it. There is no such thing as holy suffering. There is no way in which you are going to be righteously benefited by having your feet stepped on, by believing your feet are being stepped on. And yet, look, we've been through this from several directions, and many of you keep getting glimpses of this. If that was suddenly taken away from you, as much as people in the city, many people, life makes many people holler, "Boy, that's what I want, is to quit suffering. That's why I'm in analysis. That's why I keep going to church. That's why I keep chasing down whatever the latest goddamn guru is. That's why I keep trying drugs, because I do want to quit suffering." That's parts of life's body. Remember, it'll say anything. We'll look at it another way right quick. If what you call suffering, if what you say are the dispensable, the untoward, the undesirable aspects of your life, if I could suddenly jerk them out from under you, what in the hell would you do? You would be overloaded with free what? Not coupons, time. Jesus, would you be bored or what? You mean there was nothing to worry about? All the things you got to worry about now, if they were just all gone. And at first, of course, some voice in you, some person would stand up in a crowd and holler, "Ooh, huh. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, somebody." But think about it another way. Get a glimpse of it. If it was taken away from you, what would your own yellow circuit / loud be dealing with? Would it be the ultimate shooting of the ultimate duck, the wild duck? All dreams are gone. All bets are off. Where do I go from here? Jesus, I've got so much free what? I'm about to drown in it. Time. Who wants that much time? But wait, if I had that much time, then I could worry about, good God, I got so much time, I'm going nuts. Such are the built-in remedial aspects of the city structure, because that is what would happen. Anybody, if I could fool with justice and do that with people in the city, those that was done to, we'd just take them a few little things of time, and now if they didn't have any problems, the new problem would be, Jesus, I've never been so goddamn bored in my life. And they begin to look for new ways to commit suicide even. And thus, as always, we can land on a happy note, because everything always works out for those who live in the city. It's only in the bush that things seem to come to an inconclusive conclusion. In the city people even listen to crap like this. And if I say, "Well, that's all for tonight," they'd go, "Well, it's about time." Or they'd go, "Well, I guess I'm glad I came to see one of these, because now I have a whole new definition of insanity." Whatever. It's only for people in the bush that I can say something like, "Well, that's all the tape will stop." Now, I hope that some of this I've made more clear. Of course, I don't say that. If I said something like that, well, the tape's run out, and that's all I've got to say tonight. The real revolutionists, the real would-be even recruits, it's always a thing like, yeah. It's always a feeling of, where's the period? because I tried to teach each and every one of you, and those of you that I knew close enough, I've tattooed on the inside of your thigh, commas, 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 nothing but commas, that it always seems to, quote, end in a somewhat inconclusive manner, do it not, or do it ever. But I should point out that's just from your view, because I'm always satisfied. All right, it is a little unfair. But since there are no questions at all,